Good morning. I'm David with Pasture Management Systems and glad you're with us today. We're standing in the middle of Anson County, North Carolina, in let's just say, cattle country. Want to talk with you about rotational grazing. And before we get started, give you a brief history of rotational grazing. Well, and maybe even electric fencing as a whole. Um, I have been fortunate enough in my life to be to New Zealand, the country of New Zealand, twice, and it absolutely has been an inspiration to me. Um, give you a little history on New Zealand. The total land area would be about the size of the state of Colorado. The population is just a little over 5 million people. And on that land mass, you have over 25 million sheep and over 11 million beef and dairy cattle. So, as you might can imagine or start to put together, they must be very efficient with their forage production. Um, and let me say that nearly a third of the population lives in the city of Auckland. And Auckland is a large, sprawling, it's a world-class metropolitan city. When you get out of Auckland, it doesn't take long. You get into the countryside of New Zealand. Now, a portion of that land, their most fertile, their most level land, they're producing row crops, corn, or as they say it, maize. But on everywhere else, they do not waste a blade of grass. I mean, their topography is extremely rugged. You will see cattle and sheep grazing on land. We won't pick on our neighbors in West Virginia, but many of you have been through West Virginia. You know how steep it is. And that is what New Zealand, a lot of it looks like. But you won't see trees on those hillsides. You'll see it in grass and animals, livestock grazing on it. They are extremely efficient for doing, forage production. They do it better, in my opinion, than anywhere on the planet. And, the other thing that caused why the fencing industry, New Zealand is home to it. You've got a lot of old time names like Stayfix, Pell, Speedrite, the Gallagher companies, O'Brien's Electric Fencing. All of these companies, New Zealand is their home, and they were founded there because the demand was there for products that you needed to effectively manage forage. You know, the production practices that have been effective in New Zealand for many, many decades. Why is that relevant to us here in America as livestock producers, as farmers in general, or hey, even the general public? Um, we all are very aware in the agricultural community of urban sprawl, urban development, the population growth in this country. There's not a one of us that rents or leases land that it seems like every year, daggone it, we didn't get to rent that farm because it's now a housing development. So we cannot take for granted in this country. We will always have an unlimited land mass to produce the food that not only our country and our population needs to be able to feed itself, but in America, we are also responsible for feeding a vast majority of the world. And just a few of the benefits that rotational grazing gives us as producers, it not only allows us to take the same amount of acreage and produce 25 to 40% more forage off that same acreage. Let's talk about fertilization. We all know what the price of nitrogen and fertilizer has done the last several years. Uh, it definitely affects our bottom line. But when we start rotational grazing, and when we let a group of cows, a mob of cattle, instead of just running all over a pasture like you see behind me that's been conventionally grazed, and we bring that same number of cattle, and they're going to be in a smaller, more confined area for 2 or 3 days, they're putting all that manure, all that urine, all those nutrients, all of those dollars on this small amount of acreage, and it cuts down on the amount of fertilizer any producer has to buy. When we move them to the next paddock, they're doing the same thing. The things that New Zealand has taught us, because they have been in the electric fencing business since 1939 and have been using rotational grazing long before that. What's the importance of that, and how can we apply it and benefit from it when we apply it to our production practices here in the United States? Uh, there's a lot we can do to benefit our operations by doing so. Let's think about the cow. The cow is the most efficient harvester of forage that's ever been invented, created. Um, what we'll talk about in our next video is how we can take electric fencing and use the fence to manage that cow to get the most out of them. And when we do that, they're going to manage the grass, and that is our end result. Grass is beef, grass is milk. That's what pays the bills.